All right. Well, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Well, as I said, I'm from Spanish Fork, Utah, recently going to BYU. Ever since I was about 3 years old and I could hold a crayon, I loved art. And growing up in that, I decided that I needed a job that I could make a little more money in art than just on the side kind of work. So I really took up a love for teaching. And so I've actually had the chance to teach quite a few times, and I would really look forward to the chance to doing it again, even just as a teacher's assistant.
Great. So tell me a little bit more about why you're interested in this teaching assistant position.
I think probably one of the biggest things for me is not only the chance to teach, but learning more about the Mountainville's perspective on how to teach. They're very student-centered, and they're very driven towards creating students that are autonomous and are lifelong learners, and that follows really well with my teaching philosophy. And so teaching for this school would be particularly important to me than just any old school, because I feel like I would fit in really well and that they would help me to grow in my teaching philosophy as well.
Great. What's your typical way of dealing with conflict? And give me an example.
My typical way of dealing with conflict would be to address it after a lot of thought. I used to be very hesitant about even talking about it, but I usually like to bring it home once I've got my sources and understand what I'm doing. For example, when I taught at BYU, Idaho, I had a student that had missed enough classes to be counted as an absent, but they weren't aware of the policy and wanted to talk to my supervisor about it. The teachers were supervised by adjunct faculty, and I was thinking, okay, but the student didn't seem like they would be very civil about it anyways, and I also didn't want to bring it up with my supervisor initially because that was my responsibility, it wasn't my supervisor's. But after thinking it through a little, I actually talked to the supervisor before I set him up with the student, and I asked if the student could be given maybe a lowered grade, but not completely fail the class even though they were absent more than 5 times. And the teacher said that, well, he'd like to speak with the student first to see if the student was really just didn't know or if they were slacking off, and had me sit in on the meeting, and I think it went thoroughly well.
Great. Okay. Tell me about a problem you've solved in a unique or unusual way. What was the outcome, and were you happy or satisfied with it?
One of my recent positions for BYU Idaho wasn't actually as a teacher, it was as a graphic designer. And we had a unique problem in that we were running really, really close to our Discovery Fair, which is our career fair, and we didn't have any materials for advertising, and that's what they hired me on to do. So we spent a lot of time doing just some right up against the wire developing of ideas and posters, and I had almost created the entire ad campaign. We took it to be reviewed by the board, and they thought that it wasn't appropriate for BYU Idaho. And I was not so much insulted, but I was definitely a little discouraged, thinking I have to get this in a couple of days, and you don't even like even the remotest thing about my idea. I need to get this done stat. And I think my biggest resource in this situation was to pull my team in to talk to the other people that I was working with, and we had a brainstorming session and said, okay, well, we've liked some of this part of the design, but what can we change about it that the board will approve? And so I think that's what made that situation unique, was it wasn't just me, it was everyone else pitching in to make this happen. We spent a lot of time on iStock photo, just looking through things, seeing if we could just slap a different image on it. We finally found an image that, although not even the same message that we originally had, suited really well, and it ended up being an extremely successful campaign after a few little mess-ups in the very beginning of it. So.
Great. Give me an example of a time when you had set a goal for yourself and tell me how you went about accomplishing it.
All right. I recently had the goal of actually getting into BYU. Being a transfer student, I had been accepted to BYU before, but I was concerned that maybe I wouldn't after 2 years of school at a different school. So I made sure that I knew what the requirements were. I spent a lot of time on the website figuring out what I needed to do, what classes I needed to take, and when the deadlines were. And I got ready for that. And again, I firmly believe in having a good team behind you to help you get these things done. And I applied, but I also had friends, family looking over my application materials and helping me out with that. But if I could have done it differently, I would have spent more time actually preparing up front to get into my major specifically, because I got into BYU, but I wanted to get into my art education major, and I did not give myself enough time for that, and I was right up until like midnight before all of the application materials were due. But I feel like getting started early and knowing the process and then just sticking to it and making sure I had time for enough revisions to get my application in successfully, and I got into both programs first try, so I'd consider that one a success.
Good. Give me an example of a time when you motivated others.
Oh, I had to do that all of the time when I worked in the art education classroom. Not art education classroom, the art classroom at BYU, where we had a lot of students. Some were there because they really wanted to learn how to draw better, and there were others that just needed to get the credit done with. And one way or another, it was somewhat difficult to try and get the students to actually do what you wanted them to do, even though they're college students and they should be a little more self-driven anyways. But I felt like spending a lot of time one-on-one and actually showing them the value of what they were doing. A lot of people didn't want to do it because they were discouraged by their abilities. And actually being able to sit down with them, pull out some of their art, ask them what they thought was wrong with it, and then point out what was right with it. And also address what they didn't like about it and give them some direction. And I feel like when they felt someone believed in them, as well as they recognized that they actually had some degree of ability, they kind of had a renewed sense of faith and they went forward. And also trying to remove the exterior influences of the other classmates that were downgrading them and saying, it doesn't matter what they say, you know, they can do their own art, you can do yours. That helped them a lot, being able to kind of just put their head to it and be like, okay, no, I can do this, and they did.
Good. Okay, let's see. What tricks or techniques have you learned to make school or a job easier or to make yourself more effective?
Preparation is probably the biggest thing. Also, I feel like it's really important to learn as you go. You'll never come into a position completely understanding everything that you can do to make it better. But the more time you spend and the more that you're open to the options of, I could streamline this, I could reorganize this, I could try this new thing, instead of being just totally set in your ways, I feel is the most effective way. For example, when I taught in that same art classroom, we had the issue of dealing with 50 students' work and having it all over the place. We didn't know how to organize it. Students were losing their work, so we really had to sit down and just say, okay, what are we going to do to make this work a little bit better? And instead of just being the old traditional way where we collected all of them and then had to grade them all, we created a system of folders. Every student had a folder, and that really helped things a lot. But that was something that came after having taught for a semester already. But we had to be open to that, and we worked hard at trying to figure out a solution to that.
Good. How would you describe yourself in terms of your ability to work as a member of a team?
I feel like due to my personality that I almost need a team atmosphere to be able to do well. But I'm more of a team member, not so much of a team leader, just because I'm more of a submissive personality. However, I find that my best work comes when I'm in a team atmosphere. I'm willing to put myself forward and present my ideas, but I'm also even much more willing to listen and develop new ideas. And the teams I've been in the past have done amazing things.
Good. Let's see. One more question, maybe. Let's do this one. Describe a time when you were faced with a stressful situation that demonstrated your coping skills.
I think perhaps one of the most stressful situations occurred when I worked at a family camp this summer. We had a lot of guests that would come in, and we had a guest that they've been there before, and they've had a bit of repute for kind of walking all over the employees and behaving as if they practically owned the camp. And I had heard horror stories, and I was a little nervous about them coming into my area of the camp, mostly because I have a really big habit of speaking my mind, and I thought I could easily get fired after this because they would talk to my supervisors. And as it turns out, they came in on the second day, right before closing, right before dinner, and we were going to open right after dinner, but they wanted to do something right then. We had about 10 or 15 people already there that we had to turn away and say, no, we need to close so we can go to dinner. We will be open in another hour though, so don't worry. But these people, as I said, had a little bit of an air of entitlement, and they wanted to do their project and they wanted to do it now because their 5-year-old was whining on the floor, and they just wanted me to give them their paint. It was an arts and crafts kind of cabin. And I admit I did not handle it very well initially, or I just kept on saying, no, we have rules, we have policies, we can't let you do it now, but please come back after dinner, we'd love to help you then. And I felt like I just had to turn her away, and I did get my supervisor coming in later, and that was actually probably even more stressful, was having 2 supervisors come in and tell me that behavior is not acceptable. It was really hard for me to deal with. But I realized that I did my best what I could in the time, and that now was just the time to make reparations. And so I apologized to my supervisor. I told them that I would make things right, and things got straightened out. But initially it was a little traumatic, and I was kind of beside myself in the way that I had acted and wished that I had done better. But the best thing I could do was just let it go and improve. And next time, try not to let the heat of the moment get to my head.
Good. Do you have any questions for me as the employer?
First of all, I would like to know how you think that I would fit in as an instructor at Mountainville, my philosophies, if there is a place for me and what I could do to better fill that position.
Any other questions you might ask?
Another question I would ask would be to know when would be an appropriate time to follow up, and I would also like to know what I could do if to better fill their needs to fill the position. If there's any improvements I could make or anything that they would ask of me.
Good. Well, how'd you